Anne Mahlum, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thanks for having me, John.
Tell me how solidcore started. I want to hear the founder's story. Where does this all start?
Oh my gosh. Well, I was running a nonprofit that I had started 6.5 years earlier. And that's a story in itself. But this nonprofit made my entire life made sense. My dad's an addict. I'm very close to him. He's fortunately been clean and sober for 37 plus years. And I became a runner to deal with my dad's addiction. And 10 years later, I ran by a homeless shelter and ended up starting a nonprofit that used running as a vehicle to help people who were homeless change their identity so that we could actually make real change in their life, and ended up building a big program behind that and growing it nationally. And so I had a ton of purpose and fulfillment in my life. And then this entrepreneurial knock kept happening, and it's like, okay, Anne, it's time to move on and do something else. And I think like most entrepreneurs, doing your first thing, you're like, wait, what? Like, I thought this was going to be the thing I do the rest of my life. So it was a confusing emotional experience for me. And I fought it off for a long time because I let all the self-doubts come in about, what if I'm a one-hit wonder? What am I supposed to do next? What if I just got lucky? You sort of, this thing that had happened with the running club and Back on My Feet, everything just kind of made sense. And so I didn't know if I was going to have another make sense opportunity, but it didn't go away. So I just sort of kept my eyes and ears open to what maybe could be next for me. And I was in Los Angeles. And John, by this point, I'm a fully fledged marathoner. Like, I'm working out all the time and I feel like I'm super fit. And I walked by a Pilates studio, decided to sign up for a class because it looked very LA to me and super kind of cute. And it was so hard. It was so hard. And I didn't know you could work out that way. I thought you had to jump, pound, beat up your body. And I started taking Pilates back in New York at the time. And after just like doing the numbers in my head with how much I was paying, the number of machines, classes a day, I was like, oh my God, I think this is my next thing. No one's really built a brand around this. And the important part is I felt like all of my skill sets lined up and would be the ingredients necessary to be able to build the brand. I felt I was perfectly positioned to take on this next venture. And so, I stepped down from my CEO role at Back on My Feet and had my first solidcore studio open, 5 months later.
And the LA studio that you visited,
Mm-hmm.
the Pilates studio, I'm assuming it had a reformer
It did.
machine in it.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it was called Legree method, and it was a studio called Studio MDR. And great studio. And then I found in New York, an SLT, they had the same machines. And so I didn't know anything other than that. I didn't know there was different types of Pilates or anything at that time. I asked the CEO of SLT, Amanda, who's a friend, and I asked her at the time, like, where do these machines come from? And she told me it's a licensing play, and she owns the license in Manhattan. And I was like, oh, interesting. I wonder if the license in DC, which is where I had some roots from graduate school and Back on My Feet, and just felt like that would be a really good market for me to get going. And it happened to be open. So I bought the territory rights back then. And all that really meant is I got access to buy the machines. I bought the territory. No one else could have the machines. And so I first started as a licensee of that same method. And that's where my machines come. But, we can get into that now. But 2 years into it, we completely separated and, went through a lawsuit to not have to be in business with each other.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. But I just want people to visualize because I've actually done Pilates, believe it or not, and and so if my listeners want to visualize what a reformer looks like, it looks like a 14th century torture device. Imagine like a bed with springs that you have to kind of move the base of the bed in all kinds of different contorted ways, but it creates an incredible full body workout if you know what you're doing. And it is incredible and very low impact. And it's a huge thing, but it does require this very heavy, like very prehistoric looking thing, which is a a Pilates, what do you
Mhm.
call it, machine of some sort? Is that the kind of idea?
Yeah, we named ours when we made our own. We personified her. Her name is Svetlana.
Svetlana?
Yeah, Svetlana.
What was behind Svetlana's name? What, like, obviously the play on the
Well,
word sweat?
you spell it Sweat.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a play on like a Russian woman who you imagine as being very
Tough.
tough. And then, of course, what the machine does to you, which is make you sweat.
So, okay, so let's get into, so you started licensing the tech, if you will, the machine itself.
Yeah.
Tell me about the dust up with the manufacturer. What happened and how did you kind of overcome that?
Sure. So again, I bought the territory and I was growing fast. So I had my first studio open and, all the advice, wait and see how it goes. And I just, that's just not my personality. I'm either all in or I'm not. And it was really apparent to me that I was like, I have something special. I want to get speed to market and I want to maximize on the attention and momentum that I have. So my second studio was open three to 4 months later. The fourth, the third, the fourth, the fifth, there was 5 or 6 open in the first year. And the machines started breaking and I had some early delays from the machine deliveries. And additionally, there was just continued tension between me and Sebastian Legree on how to run the licensees. There were so many of us around the country and I sort of had some input on what he could be doing better to better serve us. And he just wasn't the type of person that wanted any of that feedback, which is fine. But that combined with the machine delays and the breaking and me not being in control of my manufacturing, I got caught in conversations with my clients, that I'm having to defend solidcore, but knowing it's, I can't do anything about this. I didn't like that feeling. So I knew pretty early on, the only way I'm going to be able to build something the way that I want to is if I make my own machines. And so I sent him a letter. I thought he was in breach of the contract for many reasons. And I knew he was going to sue me. So he sued me, which was strategic on my end because I knew my insurance would cover it for business disruption. And then we countersued him. And for all intents and purposes, I feel like we won. He had to buy back his machines from us and we've never spoken since. And people ask questions all the time, like, what are the pivotal moments that made solidcore what it is? And that was one of them, John. And like, the risk was worth the reward. I knew there was no other way. It was a massive risk because it could have went another way. It could have went, no, Anne, you need to pay this guy $1 million or something, and you can't make your own machines or I don't know what. But I knew that it was the only way for me to build what I wanted. And if I couldn't do that, I didn't want to be in business with this guy anyway. So I was going to figure something else out. So, gosh, making our own machines was such a process. Hundreds of thousands of quote unquote wasted dollars because I didn't know what I was doing. You have to do tooling. You need to get prototypes, manufacturing. I worked with one engineer. We changed engineers trying to find the right partner.
So you created your own machine. So because you could have gone, weren't there other providers out there like this? The Sebastian guy was out there doing his, but aren't there other machines that you could have licensed or bought? And
sure, but I didn't want to run into the same manufacturing problem. And I also knew that if I get this right, we were buying these machines for $9,000. When I take I would take the retail out of it and I can do them for wholesale and buy in bulk. My cost of getting these studios open was just going to be more advantageous, which meant the CapEx costs were going to be lower. And I just felt this is a very smart move for the company. Now, we've had conversations around, should we make our own booking system, and have decided that risk isn't worth the reward. You need a whole technology team, to do those types of things. So we have had different conversations as the company has grown of, do we take this in-house? Do we make our own? And have decided the juice isn't worth the squeeze there. But the machines made so much sense for it to be our own machine.
How much were you buying them from Sebastian? And then what was it costing you after you'd kind of worked through the systems to make your own?
We, at the time, it was between $8,000 and $9,000. And, we got our price down to half of that.
Wow. Okay. But it's your machine. And I noticed also that you didn't call your first studio or the first few studios, solid care or solid core Pilates or Pilates Washington or reformer classes. Like it was your branding. Solid core makes no reference to Pilates and it makes no reference to reformer. Was that intentional?
Yes, it really isn't Pilates. Solid core is actually strength training. And I didn't want to pigeonhole myself. Even the whole, back then, boutique fitness was definitely getting attention in 2013, but not in Washington, D.C. And in New York, it had this stigma of kind of being cutesy and feminine and, not for real athletes. And I didn't want anybody to think that about this workout. Even the design in the studio, I remember working with our architects and me being very adamant that there had to be a balance of masculine and feminine elements in the studio so that you didn't walk in. I mean, the studio that I went to in LA, John, it was pretty, but it was all pink. And there was no men in that studio. And I was like, this is an athletic workout and I don't want any gender to be turned off when they walk in here. So that was really important. And I didn't want to pigeonhole us. I mean, frankly, our whole pitch in the beginning was, solid core, the hardest workout you've never tried. And so there was this ambiguity around, well, what is it? And the marketing, the difficulty to describe it can be challenging from a marketing perspective. But if we got enough people to come and try it, they all just kept telling their friends that, like, I can't even explain it. You just have to go try it. It's like unlike anything you've ever done before.
And were you ever tempted to branch out? Because, of course, everybody who ever opens any sort of boutique fitness studio, one of the growth options is, well, if we're doing so well with the solid core workouts, like why don't we get treadmills? Maybe we should get some free weights in the back, and so people could have a free weight workout after. Was that ever tempting to you? Did you ever hear voices in your ears saying we should expand or broaden our offering?
No. I mean, that happened to me early and back on my feet also, when people would start to say, oh my God, this is working with running, we should use bikes and everything else. And I'm like, all that would add a level of complexity. Where are the members of the guys who live in homeless shelters going to store their bikes? What happened if someone gets a flat run when we're out on a ride? I mean, it was just why back on my feet was so perfect was like, you just need a pair of running shoes. And there isn't a whole lot of equipment that's going to go wrong when we go out for a run. And solid core was the same thing. I mean, I'm marketing it that it's a workout. If I add other elements in, well, now it's a gym. And now it becomes even more confusing to figure out what we are, who we offer, why we're telling people that this workout will change their body. And you don't want to be, well, which workout? One with the free weights or this one? So I think people do that too quickly or make mistakes. It's like, I wanted to stay in my lane. I wanted to own this category. I didn't want to be confusing. And I knew we'd had a much better chance of scaling if I just focused on the meat and potatoes of what the solid core workout was. And other people, Barry's can win the treadmill category. I don't care. I'm not competing, for that business.
Love it. How did you finance this thing? Because I mean, even at $4,000 a pop for a machine, there's some money involved here.
Yeah. So I had saved, $175,000 through my time at Back on My Feet. Not only, I wasn't making, of course, a ton of money when I started Back on My Feet, and it took a couple years for me to even take a salary from the board. But the organization was a $6.5 million, nonprofit, and I was raising all of that money annually. And so at the end of my time there, I was making $175K plus being bonus. I mean, that's the thing I really appreciated about my board. We all approached it as business, and it's like, great, Anne's raising and, producing all of this cash for the business. We want to keep her incentivized and we don't want her to feel financially stretched. I don't think there's anything wrong with, doing well while you're doing good. And so I also started speaking at that time, John. And I remember people were asking me all the time to come speak. And at some point I just said, yeah, it's $10,000. And someone paid me. And I was like, oh my God, why have I been doing this for free? And so I just started saving and putting all of this money away, not knowing what I was going to ever want to do next, but I just wanted enough to have options if and ever when I found myself, I didn't want to be beholden to anybody or financially strapped. And so it took pretty much every last penny to get this going. I had to, pay the licensing fee up front, which was like $25K. Every landlord that I talked to about space in the beginning, wanted me to put down 4 or 5 months of security deposit, which I frankly did not do after the second one. I refused to do it because it took so much of my cash, but I had to for the first one.
What would that cost on a studio? What would the security deposit be on it? Like, what's a month rent?
Yeah, my first space was small, and this was 10 years ago, so the security deposit back then was like $38,000. But, in New York City, where your rent is 30 grand, you're talking about $150,000 for a security deposit. And, you're never going to see that money again. They're always going to find something, at least half of it, repairs, blah, 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 when you move out. And frankly, John, like I said, I just needed the capital. I couldn't be affording. Back then, when you're trying to get a second, third studio open, I needed every $1,000 that I was making.
Okay, wait, before you go further, I gotta ask. So I've tried to negotiate with commercial real estate people, and I haven't done it in a while, but I find them the most difficult people to negotiate with. They've got all their metrics and their ratios with their banking, and they're like, they just seem to be so rigid in their models. I can't believe you convinced them to do this without a security deposit. Like, how did you convince them? That's crazy to me.
Well, a couple of things. One, I always in the beginning would meet face to face with my landlords because I wanted them to see my passion. And I'll tell you that what I did at Back on My Feet, I grew this thing a nonprofit nationally helping the homeless. It is a difficult thing to raise money for. And so I just sold myself. And I also, remembered How to Win Friends and Influence People is one of my favorite books.
Yeah, Dale Carnegie. Yeah.
And, I'm like, I remember asking, why is this security deposit so important to you? Because I can tell you why not giving it to you is so important to me. I had a corporate guarantee, a 3-year guarantee on these leases, so it's like, if you're worried about me not paying rent, like legally I'm bound to do this. That should be enough, and I just found that a lot of them didn't have great answers. It was, well, that's just the way that it's done. And so when I understood exactly what you're saying, which it was more about what they could show to the bank, I'm like, okay, what if we did an 11-year term or a 10-year term? We agreed on the rent in the beginning, and then I would push back on the security deposit, and then I would add the rent in back in 8 years, 8, 9, and 10 to give them the same financial picture, but just continuing to say the first year of this business, if you don't support me, I may not make it to years 9 and 10, but if it's all the same to you and you just need a ledger to show that you have this tenant committed to these years, you're going to destroy. I have a better chance of being around at year 10 if we can structure the deal more favorable for me in the first year.
And did you set up each solidcore location as its own LLC so that the landlord could basically go after that individual legal entity, or did the landlord have security against the whole company?
It evolved over time, as you might imagine. So in the beginning, it was solidcore DC was the legal entity. And then when we opened in Virginia, it was solidcore VA. So we did it by state, and then we started doing it by individual LLC for location. And then the corporate company, as it got bigger, would put a corporate guarantee on top of that particular location, but it would always be limited. We would never do more than like a 3-year with a 1-year rolling. Never. If anybody is in brick and mortar, never agree to give a corporate guarantee or a personal guarantee for the full term of the lease. I've never had to do that. And I just tell people, if the landlord won't, don't do the deal, because that's a huge, massive financial commitment. If by chance it doesn't work out in year 3 or 4, you're stuck on the hook for the next, 6 years. And to your point, John, yes, landlords can be very assertive about making sure they get their financials, as much as they can.
That's really interesting. I didn't even know you could do that. So I thought, like, when you sign a 10-year lease and you guaranteed it, so to speak, I thought it was for the 10 years. You're saying that no, you can limit that to like a 3-year window.
Totally. Yeah, we've always limited, and again, we just don't do deposits at all at solidcore anymore. And I'll give another tip for people who are in brick and mortar. I learned early on, you hear people like, our second location needs to be in this neighborhood, and frankly, not just even this neighborhood, on this block and whatever. And if that's really where only the next location will work out, you don't really have something that's going to scale in my mind. You need to say our second location could be in a lot of different places because we have a product that's going to cater to multiple demographics in this city or whatever. So we started putting multiple letters of intent out. And if one landlord would just give us a hard time, if he doesn't think we're walking away, it was just easy to be like, okay, no problem. Let us know if you can accept our terms. And, meanwhile, we're going to go expand over here. So even today, my guess is, obviously I don't work there anymore, but my guess is there's 150 letter of intents that are being negotiated back and forth right now in different locations, just so we can get and maximize the deal that we want.
So fascinating. Okay, so let's go back to the money stuff. So you scraped to get 175 grand, which is enough to get a couple of studios off the ground. Where do we go from there on the money stuff?
Yeah, so we were busy and profitable from the beginning. I know that's not normal, but John, as someone who wasn't I don't have a finance background, right? So I was very frugal with money. Even opening up these studios, there's this fun story I always tell about pallet wood. I wanted pallet wood on the wall because I thought aesthetically it looked cool. And I couldn't find anybody to do it for less than 10 grand. That was what the contractors were quoting me. So I typed in free pallet wood and got pallets delivered. It was pouring rain that day. I got 10 of my friends. I bought them beer and pizza. They stripped them off, sanded them, and we nailed it to the wall. So I just was not spending money on things that I didn't think mattered. And that really that's how the company, continues to operate today, but especially back then. I needed money for the machines. I needed money to pay coaches. And I felt if I can deliver that experience, it's okay if the floor, oh my God, I never finished the floor in the first studio. And I just spun it that it's raw, just like the workout. I couldn't afford it. And so I then took, the money that was coming in from the first location. One, I was doing everything. I was coaching. I was, handling payroll, anything and everything I could do. So I didn't have a whole lot of HR employee costs right away. I just had to pay my coaches. And so, 50, 60 grand was coming in and I'm just banking it next studio. I would, and because I would negotiate with the second landlord on giving me 4 months abatement that I wouldn't have to pay rent. And I would negotiate with my general contractors to give me more favorable terms. Instead of net 30, can I get net 60? I just was asking and negotiating anywhere I needed to, where I had to put out a big pocket of money.
But you did eventually raise some money. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I actually raised a little bit of money from a Back on My Feet board member. His name is Dave Grisson, and he's actually still an investor in software today. And I told him I needed money to make my own machines, and I was probably going to go through a lawsuit. And Dave had seen what I had done at Back on My Feet and just was like, I trust you implicitly, and I know you're going to figure it out. So he put in a few $1 million back in 2015. And that's what I used to do the machines, go through the lawsuit, pay lawyers, all of those kinds of things, and open up obviously a couple more studios with that fund. And then once I got to 25 studios in 2017, I was like, okay, I'm tired of opening, 3, 4, 5 studios a year. I want to open 20, 30, 40 studios a year. And so I need to raise some capital. I didn't know anything about raising money. I had to learn as I go. I had to, look for people who could explain things to me. I was reading, I'm listening to podcasts. And I thought to myself, Soul Cycle, they've done it. How do I get a hold of one of them and they can maybe connect me or give me some guidance? So I happened to get a hold of Elizabeth Cutler's number. I called her. She called me back immediately and was just like, this is awesome. I want you to make so much money. I want you to be so successful. You need to meet with Steve. He was our lawyer. He's expensive, but he's incredible. And I called Steve that day. I happened to be in New York that day. We met for an iced tea and we've been working together ever since. He connected me to 6 different firms, a combination of venture and private equity.
Wait, Steve is an M&A guy or a lawyer?
A lawyer at Lowenstein. He's an M&A lawyer though. And so he just had a ton of connections in the space. And he was kind of known a little bit, in the fitness world because he represented Julie and Elizabeth on their deal. And he got them. I mean, it's crazy how close the numbers are. Like, he negotiated for them to get $90 million each on their SoulCycle payout. And as you know, and we'll get to that, but that was pretty much my payout at solidcore as well. But anyway, so Steve introduced me to these people. I got 4 bids. I was really clear about what I needed and wanted. And I wanted to take some money off the table at that point because I owned such a strong majority of the business. Dave had a little bit of equity, but not much. And I knew I wanted to take a little bit off, diversify my own funds. And then I was going to take enough to then have an exit, in a few years. And we put about, 12 million or so in the company at that point. And we grew it from I went with Peterson, who, if you know them, John, they're great. They're out of Utah. They're family. Joel Peterson is, his family owned business. And yeah, they've been excellent to work with. And we grew the company from 25 studios in November of 17 to 75 studios by February of 2020. So little over 2 years, 2 years and 4 months or something. And at that point I was like, all right, we're going to have 100 studios by the end of 2020, which was always my North Star and my, sort of pinnacle of what I wanted to reach before I sold and then figured out something else to do. And so we hired bankers, we hired Piper. And of course, this was early March 2020. And obviously, we all know what happened then. And things switched dramatically and navigated through COVID. And which I know a lot of people, there was a lot of tragedy that happened in COVID. So what I'm going to say is not acknowledging that, but I became such a resilient leader through that. I mean, navigating these waters that frankly, nobody else on my board, nobody had gone through this before. So we were all figuring out how to do this. And I just am really grateful for that experience because I think you figure out your character, you figure out what you're made of. And it was a really good test for us and the team.
I've got so many questions about the COVID thing. Before we go there though, talk to me about that more sort of institutional round. You mentioned you raised $12 million to put in the company. The $12 million went into the company. Yeah. How much were you able to pull out at that stage? Like, what was the secondary worth, as they refer to in the M&A world?
Yeah, I took $6 million at that point.
Got it. So you took $6 million out of the company. When that happens to some people at a relatively young age, it can mute their ambition. You started a not-for-profit and you scraped together $175,000. A few years later, you're sitting on $6 million. It's a huge amount of money. It's enough money to live for the rest of your life. Some would say it's enough certainly to buy kind of anything you could possibly want within reason. Why did that not satiate your desire? Why did you not say, "Hey, I'm good. Let me take the foot off the gas and let some other folks have a turn"?
Well, as you might imagine, private equity had the same reaction of like, if we give this woman $6 million, is she just gonna, run off to Mexico? And
sure.
And Matt Day, who was a partner at Peterson, he was sort of the lead on the deal. He and I just connected right away, and he advocated for me, and he goes, "It's not about the money, Fran. It's about winning. And if you think $6 million is going to deter her from what she's built, and frankly, on her own in 4 years, they didn't know anybody who had opened 25 studios in the manner that we did all over. We had studios in North Dakota, in Philly, in Atlanta, in DC, Virginia, Maryland, and it's like, you could just tell by talking to me. I was looking for money to put water, on this thing or gasoline on this thing and like go to 100 studios. Everybody had heard me talk about that. I wasn't going to stop or quit until I had done that. And I think once they got to know me too, it's like, listen, I know I'm taking money here and I have an obligation. And, you can trust me, and I'm asking for your money, and I know you need to return capital to your partners, and I'm going to make that happen, but I felt like, again, I wanted to diversify a little bit. I still had so much of the business, even after I did that, and I even said to them, I'm like, if you think that what I stand to make, by doing what I know I can do, if you think I'm going to walk away from that for $6 million, then you shouldn't invest in me. But I don't think that you really think that. And so, then I like proving people right about who they think that I am. And I do like to win. I'm not going to get involved in something that, I don't think that I can bring to completion in regard to what completion is in my mind.
But there are some investors, and I'd be curious to know if you ran into anybody that use this tactic on you. Say, hey, Anne, we believe in you. We wouldn't be even at the table if we didn't think you were going to make this happen. But why do you need the money if you're so confident in yourself? Why do you need the $6 million secondary? Why don't we just agree that you're going to go all in? And why do you need to diversify if you believe in this business so much? Why not just kind of go all in and put all the money into the company?
I kind of cringe when I hear that a little bit, because I feel like it's weaponizing, money to people. Or even when people work in nonprofits, I kind of felt that happen a little bit of time in negotiations of and you're in this for helping people. You don't need, I'm like, please don't. This is about value of the business that I have built, and I'm selling equity, and I'm diluting myself. And that's just frankly what it's going to cost. So if you truly have doubts about my passion, commitment, dedication, and abilities, then you shouldn't do this deal. Me telling you that I am here, I am committed, go talk to 100 people who have known me and look at what I've done and accomplished. If you have doubts, I can't do anything about that. And it kind of reminded me, John, of way before I started solidcore, a few months before, I was getting sweaty palms, and when you're putting all your chips on the table, you start to be like, oh my God, is this smart? Even though I had done it before, back on my feet and put all in, I had another board member at Back on My Feet who had done really well as an executive at Accenture, and he offered me $75,000 for 30% of solidcore before I had even opened. And he's like, well, Anne, if you really want to just, park some money, this is the deal I'll do. And back then I'm like, oh gosh, that may be smart. I could at least have this if this doesn't go well. And as soon as those words left my mouth, I knew that $75K was going to be a quarter in the doubt jar that I was going to lean on just in case things got hard, just in case things weren't going as planned, and I'm like, well, if I've got 5% in that doubt jar, when things get hard, I'll start to put 10, 15, 20. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to know my back was against the wall and I had to figure this out. So I think, anybody who had their doubts about me, what I wanted to accomplish, if I didn't do a good enough job of selling that, then don't put an offer in. I'm not forcing you. There are other people in this round who believe what I'm saying. And frankly, I want to be in business with people who trust what I'm saying.
Let's talk about COVID, because this must have been brutal. So you go from 25 to 75 studios. You're on a roll. You've got all this money and talent on your board, and then the NBA shuts down, and the world goes into lockdown. What happened?
Oh my God. It was so fast. And I have a team at this point. I have a CFO, a COO, I've got good executives on the team. And as you might imagine, I'm have a higher risk tolerance than anybody else on the team because I'm the founder of the business.
Sure.
And I'm on a vacation actually, and I'm on a boat, and I start to see these alerts about this coronavirus, and I have seen the movie Contagion and some of the other movies people had seen. And I just was like, holy shit, this thing actually could be something. And, the next day was the same. And I called my COO, Brian, and I was like, hey, have you been reading and seeing stuff about this? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I need you to put a model together and show me what things look like if 50% of the business goes away. and of course he's rolling his eyes at me and just like, you are on vacation. I can't believe you're asking. I'm like, just do it. And obviously, 50% was not nearly as much as I should have him, run the calculations. I get back from the trip. This thing is getting bigger. It's like you keep hearing, okay, this event is canceled. And you think, okay, well, the big event is canceled. Like there's a lot of people there. Like small businesses are going to continue to operate. And it just literally, I just remember I came back to New York and then I'm like, I got to get down to DC. I packed a suitcase with my then boyfriend. We went down to DC and within 2 days, it's like SoulCycle's shutting all studios. And I said, we're not shutting down until we're forced to. And I quickly changed my mind there because it was like, you're getting so much. I mean, also we're in DC, John, like it's very, like it's 99.9% liberal there, and if you remember from COVID, how political, it's like,
sure.
Yeah, it's like if you believe in COVID and if you are, you should keep people safe. And if you are, you're a good liberal. So it was like, okay, we're making the call. And it was just like, we woke up that morning, people coached, we got all the plan together. And then that night we announced that, we are shutting all the studios down. And, we are going to have a call the next day or two. And at that point, I was committed to paying people for 2 weeks. We had like $2.5 million in the bank. I cannot remember our payroll at this time, to be honest, but like $2.5 million, which wasn't a lot when you have 75 studios and rent paid and your revenue goes to zero.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this thing will be over in 2 weeks. We're going to eat the bullet here. And I called the board meeting to just like go over the plan. And it was Dave, who is the Marriott. He used to work at Marriott and he was there at the time. And he's like, Anne, this is not going to be over in 2 weeks. We have a little more information than you might have. And, I would highly advise you to cut your expenses as quickly as possible. And so I listened and, that night got everybody on a Zoom call and told them we're laying everybody off. We were the first company to do it and we got a ton of slack for it. People who may or may not understand business. It's like, how can the company not have enough money to support through that? And it's like, well, yeah, but guys, we're not, we don't have any money coming in. We can't just throw out all this cash, to people. We're going to be bankrupt before we know it and can even figure out what we're going to do here. So I told the team, listen, if there's anybody you want on your side in a time of crisis, it is me. And I will get us through this. I'm going to need your patience. I'm going to need your understanding and I'm going to need your trust. And I know that's a big ask for me right now when I'm telling you all you don't have a job anymore, effective immediately. But I told them that it was my responsibility to make sure they had a company to come back to after this was over versus just pay you for 2 weeks. And this, then all of a sudden solidcore doesn't exist anymore. And I was just really clear about that's what the priority is. And every decision I make is going to be in support of that versus the short-term, satisfaction. So get your seatbelt on. It's going to be bumpy. And I told them, we're going to do a call every week. You don't work here anymore, so you don't have to be on it. But if you want to join in, I'm going to get on here every week and just tell what I know and what's going on. Even if I have no new news, you're at least going to be able to see me. And I think, John, at that time, there was so many emails going out and people just felt in the dark about things. And transparency for me as a leader has always been one of my 3 sort of values. And like, I just knew I needed to lean into that when you're dealing with so much uncertainty, people not knowing when they're going to get paid again and work again and what's going on. So that was really, I can talk forever about COVID and our decisions there, but even the digital stuff, people, and this is another thing, I know we're not in COVID now, but for those listening who will have these crisis scenarios coming forward, all fitness, everybody went to online. It's like, we need to figure out our digital offering because nobody's going to go back to in-person fitness. And I'm just like, I think that's bullshit. I don't think that that's true. I think we are in a moment in time. We are all scared and it's easy. Just like, it's easy to say the stock market's going to crash, and if you're right, you're the guy that whatever. But if you say it's going to go up, nobody cares. And so, I just was like, we can't change this entire business model and focus on a digital offering and, invest time and talent when we don't even have the right talent, but it just didn't make any sense for us. So we did what we could. We hosted some live programming. We kept it small, which is what nobody else was doing. We said, we're going to repeat the class size online. So there were lots of companies that would have like 100 people sign on and because they're just trying to make as much money as possible. And our whole thing was, we are about community and people are starved for community. We need to have 15 people, 20 people so that I can talk to John and tell you you're doing a good job and you can see me. And we started making like hundreds of thousands of dollars by just leaning into what our brand was. We were able to bring back some more people. Then PPP happened. We hired people. PPP, didn't go away. We used all that money. We still weren't open. We laid them off again. We tried to raise money in COVID. We actually got very far along. We were going to do another growth round because I'm not selling this business at a discount. I'm going to need more money. And so,
how much of it did you own at the time?
Oh, I owned 75% about.
Wow. Even after this institutional round of investment and the money from Dave. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so then we were 30 days away from closing this deal and it fell apart. And it fell apart and I'm like, we're going to have to try again. Like at some, and this was now end of 20, that happened in the summer of 2020. And so, we just kept chugging along best we could for the next few months and then started another sort of quiet process. We didn't do a full out process. We did a quiet process with a few firms in December and ended up signing an LOI like on Christmas Eve, and then closed that deal by February 1st, which I also took money off the table then too. And we did another minority partner and, started opening studios. These guys, that was BMG partners who had the same belief we did, which is like, you can already feel it at that point, end of 2020. People were itching. People wanted to get out of their houses. And it's like, have the vision to know that in-person fitness is going to come back. We run this company really well. The operations are great. The CapEx costs are small. The rent is not outrageous. Everything was primed for us to win after COVID. And so I, was like, we got to play offense. We need to start opening studios while people are going to start shutting them. We're going to get great press for it. We're going to get great real estate deals for it. We're going to get the culture back. We're going to get the team excited. And if we really believe that in-person fitness come back, that is what we should do. And so fortunately found BMG who also bought into that, philosophy. And we raised another, big round at that point.
How much secondary did you take?
At that point, I took another 9.
So now we're to 15. I'm on the beach at this point, but you're full bore.
Yeah, because no one was going to take that from me. I was having the time of my life building this company. My every entrepreneurial effort I've done is about making people's lives stronger, happier, and healthier. And I loved what I was doing and what I was building and scaling and getting to test my, business acumen, as a business is growing, again, just going through COVID, like when you feel challenged and learning and growing, it's really hard to get, bored. And I was just so motivated to drive us through this storm, get us on the other side of it. And John, at that point, after that raise, I knew that our next transaction was going to be when I was going to be done. Whether we sold the whole company or I sold, the majority of my shares, I kept control of the company at that transaction as well. It's the only way I was going to do a deal. There's no way I was ever going to raise money and, become a minority owner where I'm involved in the company. Like, just wasn't interested.
How did you do that? Through dual class shares, or did you what was the legal structure that you kept control?
I kept control of the board. So I had more votes than other people. And obviously we wrote down what the minority rights were, but nobody could outvote me for the big things. I was the only one, and I could decide on my own to sell the company. I didn't need anybody else's votes, but there's some preferred return on the cap table that needed to be satisfied. And that's how they felt protected. And I was very well aware of that. So I knew I needed to return X amount of capital in order to get paid. And so everybody felt protected. And again, I still kept control and I got to say when I wanted to have the transaction.
You mentioned that after the second institutional round, you knew that the next round you were going to leave. What made you sure that you were going to leave at that point?
Well, because I knew we would get to 100-ish studios. And again, I had felt I've done my job here. I just got us through this massive crisis. I've learned I'm a little bit more of a wartime CEO than a peacetime CEO. And it was time for me to transition into the exec chair role. And so when I did this deal with VMG, Brian Myers, who was my COO at the time, a really talented guy. And, we had been talking at this point for the last 18 months about Brian stepping into the CEO role and knowing that like I am priming him for this. He's an excellent operator, very analytical, looks at the data. We're very different leaders, if I'm being honest. But he was exactly what I needed as my number two. And I knew he would, because he was so different than me and that company was going to be a different spot, he was going to be exactly what the company needed as a number one once we got big enough.
I think that's the aspiration for everybody listening to this, or I shouldn't say everybody, a large percentage of people listening to this will be saying, I wonder how Anne figured out this situation with Brian, because Brian started as your chief operating officer. A lot of entrepreneurs have thought about bringing in a general manager, a 2IC, a second in command, somebody to kind of run the trains, making sure they're on the track and getting to their places on time. And yet they've struggled to make that relationship work to the extent that that person they can become the CEO and actually replace them. Like what advice would you have, or why did it work with Brian? Because I guess where I'm going with this is the same qualities that make someone a good COO: attention to detail, process, generally aren't the same qualities that make them a good front person for the company or CEO or spokesperson for the company. Like those two skill sets are almost never found in the same person. Like even to your own admission, you're the front person, you're the driver, and sounds like Brian was sort of more the behind the scenes guy, the process guy. Like,
yeah.
How did you coach Brian to become the front person?
So, first off, Brian is an extremely intelligent guy. He has amazing critical thinking skills. He thinks about a problem in a way that it's like he's very thorough in his thought process. So he's a little bit more methodical than I was, but the visionary of the business at that point, right? Like taking all of the risk was kind of over. Doesn't mean there's not going to have to be more at some point, but the founder of a business, I'm creating, there's so much risk. Picking the machines, going through the lawsuit, deciding when to expand to North Dakota. There was some really big, okay, this is a big bet and it's going to be great if it works out, but if it doesn't, it could be bad. And so at that point in the business, even now, there's just less riskier decisions that need to be made because it's bigger. And Brian understands infrastructure, he understands system, and he understands process, and he understands delegation. And so, yes, of course, I hope to think, I taught that Brian some things, but he also was teaching me. And I just felt like my role in solidcore was going to be less needed when we got bigger. He is a much more behind the scenes CEO. He's more comfortable there, but he has forced himself into the comfort zone, knowing that it's very beneficial for Brian, who is a Black gay man, to be out in public, because there are very few Black gay man CEOs, especially of a company of this size. It's a 9+ figure business, showing that like this is a place for more than just, if I'm being honest, white women, which was a lot of what solidcore was in the early years, because boutique fitness kind of catered to that. So he's done a really great job of stepping into a more forward-facing role. And he also understands team and having the right people in place. So we hired when I was still there as exec chair. So let me back up real quick. So after VMG, I told them Brian is going to be the CEO of this business. And so, of course, VMG got comfortable with Brian. They really liked Brian, trusted him also. And I was going to sit in the exec chair role. And I'm not going to sugarcoat all this. Of course, Brian and I had some, tension in the beginning as I'm kind of figuring out, I need to not be involved in that. That's Brian's call. I don't agree, but am I going to make a big stink out of this? It's not worth it. Just do it. You know what I mean? There was definitely stuff, and that's normal. They don't call it a transition for nothing. We had to transition how we were operating, and we worked with our board members. We had a bi-weekly call, kind of like a therapy session, to be like, how's it going? What's going well? What do we need to work on? So I think we took a very mature and grown-up approach to it. But yeah, so I moved into that role knowing, John, I wasn't going to get stuck. If I stayed in the CEO role, I was going to get stuck in the next transition of an earnout, a payout, or something, because they were going to use the old line, well, we don't know if this works without Anne, and she's been running it for so long, and how much of this brand is about her. And I was just, again, never going to sell my business on somebody else's terms that I wasn't comfortable with. So Brian was doing an excellent job, leading the business, and, continues to do so. And it put me in a position to continue to step back on purpose. And as the founder, I always knew, and I learned that at back of my feet, it's my job to make sure what I built works without me. Do you get tempted to want to be in the meeting? Yeah, because you like to feel valuable and smart. But it's the more I do that, the less the team is going to show up, the less the team is going to trust themselves and other people. I don't want them to be like, well, what does Anne think? Does Anne approve? That's just good for my ego, bad for everything else. And so anyway, we got to see Brian lead the business for 2 years as I was in the exec chair role, and he proved himself 10 times over that he was capable of doing it. So when the time came, I didn't think the business would sell last year. I had sort of planned for 2024, knowing that we would recover, but we were just killing it, if I'm being honest. And we were outpacing. We were the category winner for one, but we were just out winning every other corporate brand out there. We've recovered so quickly. We were waitlist out the wazoo, and people really were taking to. I think a little of that was luck with timing. There's just something going on with Pilates right now, and we had the studios to cater to the interest, and delivered and executed an amazing product and experience that those people kept coming back.
So what triggered? So Brian's in the role for 2 years, proving himself as the CEO. You're the controlling board seat, but in the background to some extent. So what triggered you to finally sell your last tranche of equity?
Yeah. So when we started to look at the number, we had a board meeting, we were looking at the numbers, and it was like, this makes sense. We are our corporate EBITDA was increasing, revenue was increasing, same store stores were, everything was just working. And it's like, let's just test the waters a little bit. I was, again, ready, knowing we were now approaching 100 studios, which just got a little bit delayed because of COVID. Because Brian was doing such a great job, I was less and less involved in the business, and was sort of ready to be like, I'm ready for whatever my next thing is going to be. And I'm ready to move on and have this chapter close. And so we started fundraising. We started a little process and had another failed fundraising effort within 30 days. Again, it's those things are annoying when they happen, of course. And it was, again, 30 days within closing, and macro environment and this and that. I've learned never to count my chickens before they're hatched, staying optimistic, of course. But, I've had that happen twice now. So again, we gave it a few months. The business, of course, continued to perform. And we did another quiet little process and tested waters with 3 or 4 other firms who had a good amount of interest. And the deal was, again, a little complicated because VMG, they just had gotten into this thing 2 years ago and were very bullish on the company, and kind of felt, we don't really want to sell, but it's Anne's decision. And so they were like, well, what if Anne sells her shares, we become majority owners and find somebody to buy it in shares? I'm like, that's as long as we reach the number that I want, I don't care how it's done.
What was the number?
Well, you can do the math on what I just sort of said, and I do have another, it's not an earn out, but I just negotiated another tranche on whenever solidcore happens to have another sale. I don't have to do anything for it. It's just, hey, if you guys want to be majority owner, it was sort of like, this is the cost of that. So I wanted to reach a number where my total, proceeds would be a little over 100 million when all was said and done. And we were able to get a deal, that did that. And VMG stepped into the majority role. And, I have no idea when solidcore will have another transaction, but they've been involved now for 3-ish years. And the company is continuing to scale across the country and populate, in the West Coast now. There's a lot of effort on the West Coast since that took us a while to get out there. And yeah, I remember it was such a joyous day when I got to announce to the team. And I think, John, too, a lot of times when this company sells, employees are like, oh my God, what does this mean? I had been so vocal about, I'm going to sell this company someday, and they also knew that any employee who had been there a year prior was going to get a piece of those proceeds out of my own equity, because I just believed that I put a long-term incentive plan in place, knowing that I was never going to get that big payday without that team and without their commitment, dedication, passion to work at this company and contributing to the overall performance of it. And I just never thought, I don't know why things have to be a zero-sum game a lot, where all of the money goes to the top and nothing is, left for anybody else. I just have a hard time with that in theory and in practice. And I also just think it's good for business.
How did you divvy it up?
Say that again?
How did you divvy it up?
Well,
everybody who'd been with you for a year, I get that. But was it a portion of their salary, or was it flat across the board? How did you decide to give it up?
Everybody got different. If you were there 4 years and you were a director, you got X amount. If you were there, 2 years and you're a coach, we just kind of did it by title. And then we did it by length of duration that you were there. So, I think some people got over $100,000.
Do you remember, how did you deliver those checks? Was it a Zoom call? Was it bringing people into your office? How did you do it?
Yeah, I told the whole company together that, as you all know, you've signed paperwork. If you have been at this company for a year or longer, you will be getting a portion of this. You'll be getting an email with, your exact amount based off of the length of time you've worked here, as well as what your title is, in the company.
How did people react?
They were, grateful. And also, I didn't want them to feel like, oh my God, thank you so much, Anne. I really wanted them to feel yeah, they earned that. This is not charity. This is not me feeling like wealth guilt or any of that stuff. It is me being like, you earned this. I let you know that if we build this company and create value for it, there will be financial compensation for you along the way. And I loved the parameter of being there a year, because there has to be parameters. And some people who were there 8 months, were mad. And it's like, guys, listen, life isn't fair. But our parameter was a year to show that you contributed and dedicated that amount of time in order to get this. I'm sorry you missed the cutoff, but that's the way that it goes. Negotiate an LTIP with the current, administrator or the current management that works there. But I felt really awesome about it. And I think people felt really proud of their contribution to the company, and the fact that it was worth so much that someone bought it. It's just a cool thing.
I found this to be such an interesting topic because I've heard everything across the spectrum from, I gave somebody who was struggling to pay their mortgage enough money to, pay off their mortgage, and they were brought to tears, and it was an incredible experience. It was one of the highlights of my life as an entrepreneur to be able to give that check.
Yeah.
And I've heard stories where people have received checks, big checks, and they remain kind of resentful. They see the big check that you got and think, no matter how much money you give somebody, somebody who has that sort of mindset can feel resentful. Did you run into any of that resentment among your team?
Not to me personally. Maybe there were rumblings, but again, it can't control everybody's own trauma, experiences with money, whatever. And, the reality is, John, you want to make a lot of money, go start a business. Like that's available to everybody. We live in this country where entrepreneurship is, it's not easy, but it's opportunistically available to everybody, who has an idea. It's not like, oh, well, you can't start a business because XYZ, anybody can file to incorporate a business and start selling, working, whatever it wants to be. So I've always said, like, yeah, the person who takes all of the risk, I put all of my money in, I should 100%, get more money than somebody else who works here for a year. And I don't think a lot of people are going to argue with that. And if they do, fine, you can disagree with me. It doesn't put any money in somebody's pocket. I've learned to not worry about people who, want to, whether complain, criticize, say it's not fair. It's like, yeah, guess what, guys? Life has never been fair and it's never going to be fair. I don't know what to tell you. If it's not good enough, do something about it and make the change you want for yourself and go after it and get it yourself.
Awesome. Hey, I appreciate you sharing the story. It's an incredible story. Are you up for a quick lightning round of questions before I let you go?
Yeah, okay. And for anybody listening, I actually have no idea what he's going to ask me. Sometimes I feel like we get these beforehand, but I have not seen them. So, okay.
You went through 2 or 3 rounds of financing. What was the slimiest trick a potential acquirer or investor tried to play on you to prey on your naivete about the process?
Well, I will tell you, the slimiest thing. I told you when we started, I've had really good experiences, with private equity for the most part. But one of the things I didn't appreciate was one of them tried to say, if I got any negative press, that they could take control over the business. If I caused any harm to and I'm just like, that's ridiculous. One, I can't control that. And 2, why am I the woman? Why is no other board member or anybody else in the organization being asked to sign something like this? So that was a pretty easy, no. And I can't believe you asked me that question.
And tough, in a public world, someone's always going to say something negative about you, with millions of people out there. Biggest mistake you made during the selling process? If you could have a mulligan to do it all over again, what might you do differently?
I think there were, I probably won't give a direct example, but like emotions get high, and emotions get high and you may raise your voice and it's just like, you like, this is my baby, but also this is a business and it's just a transaction. And like, I think there were some emotional moments where, whether it's past experience or not, feel like someone's trying to take advantage of me. And that really wasn't what was going on. The other side was advocating for the best deal they could. And I was advocating for mine. And I think the emotion of it sometimes came to the surface when I wish it wouldn't have.
I'm glad you brought up emotions. I've heard it's a roller coaster with some punishing lows and some incredible highs. For you, what was the emotional high and low?
Well, the high was the announcement. I mean, again, it's just
to
like,
the team?
Yeah. And like, I got to do it in person and just like celebrate. We had cake, we had everything. And, a lot of times that's not the case of when a founder sells, whether like, we don't want you to make an announcement because of the structure that is there. And we don't want to make it public. I just got to celebrate and have everybody celebrate together for what we had accomplished. So that was the highest high, and the lowest lows were when both those deals fell apart. I mean, we'd spent hundreds of thousands, and other people were, getting money. Employees were cashing out some equity, and it's just like, never mind, So I think that just makes it feel like I've got to work to regain trust again. And yeah, those are hard when you just put so much energy into something and like someone makes a decision on the other end that like, we've just decided not to go through with this. And you're like, okay.
You strike me as a self-taught entrepreneur who is resilient and resourceful. What resources did you use to educate yourself about M&A, raising money, selling your company? Are there people we can follow on X, or are there courses, conferences, people that you could point us to that would help educate us?
You know what? I had two people. Again, I've already mentioned his name, Steven Seiser over at Lowenstein. He's an incredible, well-known lawyer in this space, and he never once made me feel stupid about anything, any questions I would ask. Matt Day, also who now has started his own fund, Same thing. I feel like whenever I'm like, what does MOIC mean? What does IRR? Like John, I had to learn all of this stuff. What is preferred return? What am I signing? And then lastly, I think is the team over at Piper. When I started going through this process, Brian Smith and his entire team of people, whenever I'm like, looking at, I'm sure you've seen all kinds of modeling, and I'm just like, what is this percentage? What does this mean? Like, and anytime that anybody ever made me feel stupid, I just wouldn't work with that person. I wouldn't choose to work with them. I've had general contractors that I've, worked and that I just end up saying, we're ending our relationship. Like, you've made me feel stupid. You sexist toward me, anything. So all of the professionals that took the time to teach me, and again, not make it feel like, I can't believe you don't know this, or like, how are you raising money without this? Or how did you get so far without knowing this? So I was just offered a lot of grace by people, and I've just always appreciated that.
Awesome. And we'll put Brian, Matt, and Steve's contact information in the show notes at Built to Sell. Last question. What did you buy yourself as a trophy to commemorate this $100 million win?
I bought myself a baby blue Bentley convertible. Yeah. And I love it. I love it. So I'm not like a car person. People ask me, I'm like, I don't know, dude, it's baby blue and it's really pretty. And it goes really fast. And it also makes everybody else happy. Whenever I drive that thing, I live in Miami, and whenever I'm driving it, people want to take photos of it, pictures of it. So it seems to give other people joy too, which makes it even better.
Anne Mahlum, this was a real pleasure. If people want to reach out, is Instagram the best place to do that, or is it X, or what? How do people reach you if they want to sort of say hi?
Yeah, Instagram or on my website. It's just annemahlum.com. I do a little bit of advising. I don't work with people that I feel like I can't help. So, for example, this woman just wanted to pay me plenty of money to consult with her on her digital marketing. I'm just like, I don't know anything about that. Like, I'm the wrong person, and I'm happy to get on the call for 20 minutes because you're a friend of a friend. But, if you have a brick and mortar business that you are scaling, that you want to exit someday, and you're looking for some consultation or advising, I definitely work with a few people a month. And it's really fun for me to get to do that, especially if I'm excited about your product and your service.
That's awesome. And we'll put Anne's contact information, her website, spelling of her surname, along with Brian, Matt, and Steve's contact information at builttosell.com. And thanks for doing this.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it.